Thank you, sir. All right, we are reading from the Vimilakirti Sutra tonight. So I will read the extract that I had in mind, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something a little bit different this week. I'll talk more about the context. So I'm going to talk about the Vimilakirti Sutra itself, where it comes from and so forth. So we've got context to then talk about it, and then I'll discuss the sutra. Or then I'll talk through again this extract, and then we'll talk together. So the extract, which you have in front of you. Friends, this body is so impermanent, fragile, unworthy of confidence, and feeble. It is so insubstantial, perishable, short-lived, painful, filled with diseases and subject to changes. Thus, my friends, as this body is only a vessel of many sicknesses, wise men do not rely on it. This body is like a ball of foam, unable to bear any pressure. It is like a water bubble, not remaining very long. It is like a mirage born from the appetites of the passions. It is like the trunk of the plantain tree, having no core. Alas, this body is like a machine, a nexus of bones and tendons. It is like a magical illusion consisting of falsifications. It is like a dream being an unreal vision. It is like a reflection being the image of former actions. It is like an echo being dependent on conditioning. It is like a cloud being characterized by turbulence and dissolution. It is like a flash of lightning being unstable and decaying in every moment. This body is ownless. This body is ownerless, being the product of a variety of conditions. This body is inert, like the earth, selfless, like water, lifeless, like fire, impersonal, like the wind, and non-substantial, like space. This body is unreal, being a collocation of the four main elements. It is void, not existing as self or as self-possessed. It is inanimate, being like grass, trees, walls, clods of earth, and hallucinations. It is insensate, being driven like a windmill. It is filthy, being an agglomeration of pus and excrement. It is false, being fated to be broken and destroyed, in spite of being anointed and massaged. It is afflicted by the 404 diseases. It is like an ancient well, constantly overwhelmed by old age. Its duration is never certain. Certain only is its end in death. This body is a combination of aggregates, elements, and sense media, which are comparable to murderers, poisonous snakes, and an empty town, respectively. Therefore, you should be revulsed by such a body. You should despair of it and should arouse your admiration for the body of the Tathagata. Friends, the body of a Tathagata is the body of Dharma, born of gnosis. The body of a Tathagata is born of the stores of merit and wisdom. It is born of morality, of meditation, of wisdom, of the liberations, and of the knowledge and vision of liberation. It is born of love, compassion, joy, and impartiality. It is born of charity, discipline, and self-control. It is born of the path of 10 virtues. It is born of patience and gentleness. It is born of the roots of virtue planted by solid efforts. It is born of the concentrations, the liberations, the meditations, and the absorptions. It is born of learning, wisdom, and liberative technique. It is born of the 37 aids to enlightenment. It is born of mental quiescence and transcendental analysis. It is born of the 10 powers, the 4 fearlessnesses, and the 18 special qualities. It is born of all the transcendences. It is born from sciences and super knowledges. It is born of the abandonment of all evil qualities and the collection of all good qualities. It is born of truth. It is born of reality. It is born of conscious awareness. Wow. So what's going on here? Let's spend a minute talking, as I say, about the Vimilakirti Sutra. This is one of the texts in the Mahayana canon. As you can see from this book, it's not very big. It's It finishes in this text on page 101. No, that's 101. And it begins on page 10. So it's about 90 pages long of standard text. It's not a particularly big sutra. But it's a very mysterious sutra. So Vimilakirti is a householder, and the Buddha shows up. He's sick. So the Buddha happens to be in the same town as Vimilakirti, and he says, "Oh, I just realized Vimilakirti's sick. You all should go visit him," he says to his arhats, which are the old guys and gals from the old stories, and the bodhisattvas, which are the new guys and gals from the Mahayana tradition. So none of them want to see him because Vimilakirti is kind of scary because he's just overwhelming. He's a Buddha, and really that's what part of the story is. He really is a Buddha. He's an incarnation of a Buddha. Anyway, so the arhats will go one at a time, and they're made to look like complete dolls. He just shows them all up. But then the bodhisattvas will go one at a time, and he makes them look like buffoons too, because they don't get it. Nobody gets what he's teaching. What is he teaching? This is an extract from a chapter called Liberative Technique. What is it called? Inconceivable Skill in Liberative Technique. So what this inconceivable skill, this sutra is full of a couple of things which are kind of unusual and very special and merit a bit of thought. The first is he has magical powers. He sees what people think. He sees the contents of people's minds. At some point after everybody's visited individually, everybody all starts showing up together, and he's in this small room lying on his bed, and he makes space in this small room for everybody to come in, and then for Buddhas and all sorts of other people to show up and just like float around in the sky. So he's creating his own TARDIS, right? He's just doing this thing. He incarnates, or he brings all these Buddhas in. I mean, he's doing all these magical things. The commentaries tend to say, well, this is all metaphor, and this is all, parable, and it's to make points and help you understand things. In the Pali Canon, the Buddha, there's a lot of science in the Pali Canon, if you will, which is the intentional cultivation of knowledge. So there's the discussion of the jhanas and the meditative techniques, and step by step through these, and what we can experience, and mind states, and very logical stuff. There's all the lists. These are very logical stuff to help us understand the practice. So we've got tools to navigate. And then he says, and as a grown man would stretch his arm, the Buddha disappeared from where he was and showed up the other side of India where there's somebody who's suffering. Or he's visited by devas, or he goes and visits devas in Brahma heavens, right? So why are these things commingled? It doesn't make any sense. If these are just metaphors, if you've got this literal canonical stuff and then you've got these stories. The same is true, interestingly, in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which were written several hundred years later, but which come from practices that co-arose. Patanjali does even more so perhaps than the Pali Canon. There's 4 sections in that text, and the first 3 are a very, very logical step-by-step approach to yoga, meditation, devotion, cultivation of insight, wisdom, and compassion. And then the 4th section is about all these mystical powers, about disappearing and reappearing and seeing people's minds and becoming invisible. And doesn't make sense that he would put that in there if it's not real in some important way. So there's a tendency to look at those magical things as, that's just the way people used to talk. But I would invite you to open your minds Because as you practice, as you engage in this practice more and more, you will experience in your practice a lot of things that you cannot explain, a lot of things that just cannot be explained by science. So there's a lot of this magical stuff in here. The other thing that's in here, and it's at the beginning of this chapter on the Liberative Techniques, he goes to bars, he goes and works in government, he shows up at brothels, he shows up at all of these places to help people wake up. So he's engaging in all of these, for want of a better word in the Buddhist text, they'd be called evil practices in order to wake up. So there's something profoundly tantric about what's going on here as well. This is the tantric practice, and tantric practices tend to be esoteric. So the tantric practices are taking in the dark and transforming it into enlightenment. And they're also mystical, right? So that's the way this text is shaped. This is the one where the goddess shows up and I forget whether it's Subhuti or Shariputra. I think it's Shariputra. Talks to her about, well, you can't wake up as a woman, and so she transforms him into a woman. He says, what's going on here? And then she has this exchange with him about, so what happened to that woman's body? What, you know? And it's like, it's just not real in the way you think it's real, and getting stuck on stuff. In that same section, petals rain down from heaven as a result of all of these wonderful stories, and they land on the arhats, and the arhats are just trying to brush them off, and they don't know what's going on. And the bodhisattvas, they're all landing, and they're just flaking off. Because nothing sticks on the bodhisattvas, right? Their mind is so clear that nothing sticks, nothing holds. So there's a lot of these mystical and mysterious things going on in this story. So with that as context, let's go back to the text. I'm going to do it at a fairly high level because it's pretty dense. One of the other reasons I'm going to do it at a pretty high level is I believe that as an esoteric text, there's a whole bunch of code in here, and that all of the individual line items have particular meaning, and there's a story underneath this which really isn't accessible to us. I think even within that, there is still a lot here that's really, really valuable, which is why it's one of the things that I keep in my list of things I read and recite from time to time. So that whole first section, if you look at it, this body's impermanent, fragile, unworthy of confidence. This is getting us to look from a whole variety of different ways at the insubstantiality and impermanence of this thing we walk around in that we call me. Just to really recognize how fragile, how frail, how flimsy, how impermanent this really is. And yet we don't think about it, and we take it as so real so much of the time. And as I say, it looks at it in a number of different ways, as a bubble, so like there's air with this very thin film, and then there's water and so forth, the trunk of a plantain tree, some classic metaphors here. So that's the first one. And then towards the end of that paragraph, this body is ownerless, and then we go on to this body is inert. And this is a different way of looking at it, and it's a different, not a different way of looking at it, it's a different thing. This body is inert, this body is lifeless. What does that mean? If we look at this body, and we look at it closely, the body does stuff. This body right now is talking, and it's looking around, looking at the people on this funny screen thing, and the people in this funny space thing. And that's what the body's doing. But where does the life energy in this body that's animating it come from? What is that? What is the connection between that energy, that life, and this inert sack of skin and bones that somewhere between 5 minutes from now and 50 years from now will just be a lifeless sack of skin and bones. This is inert, it is lifeless, and yet it's utterly mysterious. Utterly mysterious. And this is where faith traditions over the years, spiritual practices over the years, metaphysical practices over the years have landed on what on earth that is in so many different ways. And in the Mahayana tradition from which this comes, of course, we have Buddha nature. Everything is animated by Buddha nature. What is that? And there are a number of Zen teachers who said all sorts of things about this. Linchi talked about that which goes in and out of the eyes and the mouth and the nose, recognizing again that what you see is inert, and yet there's something animating it. There's a me that's animating it. So then we go on to friends, the third paragraph, the body of a Tathagata. Now Tathagata, that's what the Buddha called himself in the Pali Canon, and it's a word used a fair amount in the Mahayana tradition as well. It means thus come, thus gone. It's intentionally ambiguous. But this Buddha had some questions that he put aside. He just wouldn't answer. And when he was asked, so where does a Buddha go when a Buddha dies? He said, that's not a well-framed question. I can't answer that. Does a Buddha not exist after death? Does a Buddha exist after death? Does a Buddha both exist and not exist after death? Okay, I've got it. Does a Buddha neither exist nor not exist? Doesn't land on any of those. So what, sorry, I said a Buddha, I meant a Tathagata. Does a Tathagata have those attributes? So given that, what is this Tathagata? This Tathagata, you see it, it's talking to you. And yet, from its side, it does not recognize its existence now, before death, after death. It just doesn't recognize existence in a way that computes for us. What is that? This is the body of a Tathagata. So this section here talks about how the body of a Tathagata arises. It's born of gnosis, it's born of stores of merit and wisdom, born of love, compassion, joy and impartiality, the Brahma Viharas, charity, discipline, self-control and so forth. It talks about how it arises, but it doesn't tell us what it is. So it leaves open this profound mystery we put aside because it's impermanent and fragile and just not something we can hold on to, and because it's inert and it's lifeless. We put aside this body as something we identify with. We don't deny its existence. We just put aside its identity as something, put aside this as being something we identify with, because you can't identify with something that has those attributes. But then it says, friends, you should arouse your admiration for the body of the Tathagata. And then talks about how that body arises. And that's the mystery. What is that body? And again, if you look at the context of this, this is a mysterious text. It's full of all these magical and mysterious things and these tantric things. So there's not an answer here. There's just a really deep question for us to open to. There's a lot of negations and a really deep question for us to open to. So with that, I will pause.